From the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador, this is From the South, and I am Soyini Gray. The Venezuelan government has announced they will airlift migrants who want to return home. So far, 89 citizens have returned home from Peru and 185 from Brazil. The measure is part of the Return to the Homeland program. President Nicolas Maduro has been calling on Venezuelans who left to return home and participate in the new economic measures. Dozens of Venezuelan migrants are lining up at the Venezuelan embassy in Peru to sign up for their ride home. They say they were given false promises of work before leaving Venezuela. They've also been the target of xenophobic attacks. Venezuela will begin to pilot a new system for selling gasoline Tuesday. The scheme will be tested at gas stations in 8 border states. Gasoline has been smuggled from the country, especially into Colombia. The new system will cut subsidies and raise the price to international levels. However, many Venezuelans will still get cheap fuel if they present their homeland card.
This new system aims to cut the hands off of Colombian scourgers who steal our gasoline and steal billions of dollars of gasoline that belongs to Venezuela.
Colombia's Supreme Court has rejected another legal challenge filed by former President Alvaro Uribe. Uribe filed the challenge against the judges in charge of a fraud investigation of him, but the court believes the reasons presented by his legal team are not valid. The case against the former president started in February. The National Liberation Army in Colombia says it will release kidnapped military and police personnel. This despite not reaching an agreement with the government. The armed group is afraid that the risks for those captive could increase as time passes. The ELN has also asked international organizations and the church to support the operation. The government has been reluctant to resume negotiations with the ELN. According to President Ivan Duque, the group must stop all its, quote, criminal activities before this can happen.
We are aware that the government will not facilitate an agreement for the release of the kidnapped. Time goes by and the risk of tragedy increases for the life and well-being of those captives. The government has opposed to third parties participating and guaranteeing the safety of the operation. For this reason, a release that could have been done 3 weeks ago hasn't happened yet.
And another social leader has been killed in northern Colombia. The victim was the president of the Community Action Board in the municipality of Terrassa. According to eyewitness reports, a group of hooded men shot the victim dead near his home. Social organizations have condemned the attack. They are demanding the government protect social leaders. And thousands have marched in Argentina against the austerity measures announced by President Mauricio Macri. They are angry about the adjustment policies, saying they will increase suffering. On Monday, Macri announced up to 11 ministries will be removed and a new tax on exports will be enforced.
Halving ministries implies a really dire situation for the public administration and state. They're reducing the state, they're shrinking it. The state is losing its power to regulate.
A huge indignation. An overact, rehearsed speech that doesn't take care of the disaster they have done because they impoverish us and they send the money abroad.
Finance Minister Nicolas Dujovne is meeting with the head of the International Monetary Fund Tuesday. He wants to negotiate an early payment of $29 billion to cover next year's budget. But critics say the government is just pushing the country into more debt. Macri's cabinet signed a $50 billion loan with the financial institution, the largest in history. Our correspondent in Buenos Aires, Egado Esteban, has more.
A day after President Mauricio Macri imposed new economic measures in an attempt to slow down the crisis, the dollar continues its steady rise over the peso, and the stock exchange continues to drop. Inflation is well on its way to reaching 46%, as was forecast by the government itself. At the start of the year, inflation was forecast at just 10%, but that number has clearly skyrocketed, highlighting the failure of the Macri administration. Today, also the rise of fuel prices by 12%, which could eventually lead to rising prices for basic food items and cost of living expenses. Yet wages remain stagnant. Looting has started in some cities, in particular in Chaco, where a 13-year-old child was shot dead by security forces.
Okay, so let's get more details on the currency crisis in Argentina in this report.
After a series of economic adjustments, Argentine President Mauricio Macri addressed the nation. However, people were expecting more than just a speech. They were expecting him to change his policies.
This can't all change in an instant. It's a gradual process. We had to change many things that were not favorable for everyone, but were necessary. What we did was to ask the world for some help.
After his short presidential address, Macri explained why he decided to close down 10 ministries. He also confirmed he would raise tariffs on soy and other grains. After his measures were announced, the Minister of Economy, Nicolás Duhavne, gave a speech as well.
Por supuesto, también debemos reconocer que hemos cometido.
We must admit that we made some mistakes. Argentina's weak position forced us into this situation. Our intention is to bring solution to all the challenges we are facing. At the same time, we must take care of the most vulnerable section of the society, reduce the taxes and the fiscal deficit. We didn't take enough care of the fiscal issues before, and that has greatly affected Argentina in comparison to those countries who have balanced fiscal record.
Duhavne promised a balanced budget after a high fiscal deficit this year. Public education funding was badly affected following corruption allegations against some government officials.
En el año 2019,
in 2019, instead of aiming for the original goal of 1.3% of deficit, we will work for fiscal balance and not in the payment of interests. This means that we will save $6 billion that we won't need to return to the international market. In 2020, we will have more than fiscal balance. We will have a surplus of 1%, which will save us another $5.2 billion.
With these weak measures taken by the government, experts say the officials want to dollarize the economy. Experts also fear the way it can affect the country.
For that to happen, by our calculations, the dollar would have to cost 85 pesos. At that level, our domestic market will be ruined. It would lead to the collapse of Argentinian society. It's not viable.
While these changes by the government are meant to stabilize the fluctuating market, the peso remains historically low. The Ministry of Economy, Duhavne, will be traveling to Washington to renegotiate the loan agreement with the IMF.
Brazil's Workers' Party has announced it will present an appeal to the Supreme Federal Court. It wants to guarantee the presidential candidacy of the former president, Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva. The PT will also appeal to the United Nations. Its Human Rights Committee had said that Lula's political rights needed to be respected. Vice presidential candidate Fernando Haddad says the party will continue appealing to all instances in order to secure Lula's candidacy. However, the party is banned from using Lula's images in any of its ad campaigns. Time now for a short break. We'll have more news in a minute.
Our actions have an impact on the environment. It's our responsibility to change for the sake of our planet. Let's be part of this transition. Watch, preserve, and protect your Green Zone. Wednesdays, only on Telesur.
Welcome back. The presidents of Peru and Bolivia have finished their fourth bilateral summit. They discussed the construction of the bi-oceanic train and regional development.
Bilateral cabinet summits between Bolivia and Peru started in 2015. So far, there's been an 80% completion rate on agreements to date.
It's important to record our efforts to clean up Lake Titicaca. Contaminated water from both countries flows into that lake. So we have both compromised to fix the issue in the short term.
The summit was held in the city of Cobija, near the border with Peru. Agreements on border security, fighting drug trafficking, as well as other issues were made. Another topic that was up for discussion was continuing the construction of the bi-oceanic train.
This train will be part of intercontinental trade. The port of Ilo will be a strategic point for imports and exports. Billions of products will go through there.
This train plans to join the Atlantic Ocean with the Pacific, covering nearly 4,000 kilometers. It has an investment of $14 billion.
All of South America will see the benefit. I have said before, this is the biggest physical integration project of the 21st century.
On a 42-point declaration, both governments announced they will push for the future of the Union of South American Nations, UNASUR, so it may once again work for integration. The fifth bilateral summit will be held in Peru in 2019.
Bolivia has a new foreign minister. Diego Pérez was sworn in on Tuesday. He is of indigenous descent and belongs to the Quechua community. He has previously worked as Bolivia's ambassador to the Organization of American States. Pérez replaces Fernando Wanacuni. And Argentina's former president, Cristina Fernández de Kirchner, will go on trial in February 2019. So far, 12 businessmen and high-ranking officials linked to the case have been arrested. Fernández has denied any wrongdoing. She has also denounced these proceedings as a political persecution. Congressmen from different political parties in Peru have called for Attorney General Pedro Chavarri to resign. Along with other authorities, he has been accused of corruption and is allegedly linked to a criminal organization. Through an official statement, Chavarri said he would not resign since there's no evidence or legal basis for those accusations. In Honduras, 2 boys taking part in a student protest were found dead. Now, a leaked video supposedly showing the 2 students being arrested just before they were killed has caused outrage.
In the week before the murder of Gerson Daniel Mesa and Mario Enrique Suarez, there were several students' protests against price increases.
We have 3 demands: the reduction of fuel prices to the previous one and immediate freezing. The next point, that the previous transport fare returns.
Mario Enrique Suarez had participated in this protest, and days later he was dead, along with his friend. Hours later, the footage, which allegedly shows them being arrested, began to circulate.
This has all the features of an execution. These young men were dragged out of their houses, then, according to forensics, tortured in an unknown place, tied up, and then murdered with a firearm.
Immediately, a police spokesperson denied it, arguing that they were criminal gangs wearing fake uniforms.
The name tags shown in these beds are bigger than the officially used by the Technical Criminal Investigation Bureau, in the same way the color is different from the official yellow shade.
Meanwhile, in the school where Mario studied, fear is in the air among students, teachers, and parents.
We're shocked because what we are living is violence taking the lives of the young away. Whether it comes from pseudo-police groups or from organized crime that breaks the law, we're worried about one thing. Until some years ago, the concept of youth was respected.
Despite the fear of violence the state is using, students are determined to make a stand. A protest is expected in front of the UN office.
Mexico's outgoing president, Enrique Peña Nieto, has delivered his final State of the Nation address. Peña Nieto said his government's strategy against drug cartels managed to reduce the capacity of those organizations, but explained it also caused the breakdown of the criminal groups into smaller ones, increasing violence. Experts say his administration was marked by corruption scandals and gang violence. A mass poisoning has affected more than 300 children in the coastal area of Chile. Relatives of the victims are asking the government for help.
Residents in the communities of Puchincaví and Quinteros have used social media to tell the world their children were victims of mass poisoning. They denounced it before this became news.
We were in class and suddenly all of us began fainting. There was an unbearable smell.
Since then, 2 weeks have passed. There are more than 300 children affected. A toxic cloud coming from an industrial camp dating back to the 60s is believed to be responsible for the events. The Regional Service of Health has identified methylchloroform in the air. The use of this substance has been forbidden in the country since 2015 because it affects the blood system and cardiorespiratory and central nervous system.
She felt weak. She had a lot of headaches. She also felt fatigue in her legs. We immediately decided to take her to the hospital. When the doctors began to examine her, they discovered she lost its sensibility in her legs.
Despite the government order the children to be examined, the Minister of Health has dismissed the consequences of the poisoning.
I wanted to contradict the Minister of Health. I want to say that children didn't have a normal reaction to the toxic cloud. The victims suffered from nausea and paralysis.
Local media eventually reported on what happened. The Minister of Health retracted from its statement, and President Sebastián Piñera announced an intervention plan in the area.
Canada's Ministry of Education is assuring parents that all schools will reopen Tuesday after teachers walked off the job. The teachers' strike closed about 34 schools on Monday, the first day of the new school term. Other schools were short-staffed, forcing parents to collect their children. Negotiations between the Guyana Teachers Union and the government have hit a stalemate. Teachers are demanding a 40% wage increase. The government says it cannot afford it. And unions in Trinidad and Tobago are gearing up for a national strike this Friday, but the government is threatening legal action if certain essential service workers walk off the job. The Minister of Public Administration warned that the armed forces, healthcare workers and teachers could face a fine or imprisonment. The unions have vowed to ramp up their actions if the government follows through on their threats.
We stand firmly in solidarity with all the teachers and the problems they have. And if you want to exacerbate the problems that you have already created, just touch one of these trade unions in Trinidad and Tobago.
Investigators are trying to find out what caused the fire that destroyed Brazil's National Museum. Activists are blaming government funding cuts. Police officers say the building didn't seem to have a sprinkler system and had suffered neglect. Investigators are looking into whether an electrical fault was to blame or if a paper lantern landed on the museum's roof.
I think it's essential that there be clarification about the causes of the fire, and at this time, the federal police are concentrated on that. We need to know exactly what happened and what caused this fire. After that, it will also be possible to clarify who is responsible and understand what exactly happened and who is responsible.
Museum curators have been the first to go through the ashes and collect the remains of the collection. They wanted to make sure artifacts wouldn't be confused with debris. The museum housed more than 20 million items, including Brazil's oldest human fossil and meteorites. The government says it will seek international help and spend $3.6 billion on rebuilding the collection.
I was in a rush to get in there because I knew how to recognize the meteorites. I knew where they were, so that I could try to recover some. They were brought out of the ashes like a real phoenix.
And a group of students gathered in Rio de Janeiro to protest against government's neglect of the museum. They held placards reading National Catastrophe and Culture in Ashes.
The National Museum had very important items. It attracted attention on an international level. There was a lot of research which will now come to an end history will be erased. With this, our memory gets erased too.
The fire has been caused by years of neglect by the federal government. Our anthropology program suffered absurd budget cuts these last 2 years. My anthropology class, for example, suffered a 70% cut from 1 year to the next.
Archaeologists unearthing Mayan ruins in Honduras have found a link between royalty and inhabitants of the El Chodo community. The finds show architectural connections started with the 10th Copan ruler who led the empire from 500 AD. Experts are working at the Copan archaeological site east of the country. These ruins are one of the most important spots to learn about the Mayan civilization. We'll take another break now. World News is next.
With developing events being presented through analysis. Our coverage transcends borders. With renowned journalist Walter Martinez.
Salud amigos, tripulantes de nuestra querida, contaminada y única nave espacial.
Dossier. Weekdays. Only on Telesur.
Y ponga usted las cámaras, señor director.
Welcome back. The China-Africa Cooperation Summit has concluded. Chinese President Xi Jinping vowed to contribute to the financial and commercial development of the African continent. He also said China will provide humanitarian aid to African countries affected by natural disasters. China will implement 8 major initiatives in Africa over the next 3 years.
We will support Africa to achieve several food safety goals by 2030. We will work to implement a program to promote agricultural modernization using 50 agro-assistance programs. We will provide humanitarian food aid to African countries affected by natural disasters. We will send 500 agricultural experts to Africa to train young researchers and agribusiness entrepreneurs.
The president of the African Union, Paul Kagame, said these agreements reflect the desire of China and Africa to build a relationship with shared interests.
The relationship between Africa and China is based on equality, mutual respect, and a commitment to shared well-being. The expanded cooperation framework presented by President Xi fully reflects our common understanding of the future of our community.
Rwanda's ruling Patriotic Front is leading the country's parliamentary elections. The Electoral Commission said the results give the ruling party nearly 70% of total votes. The opposition Democratic Green Party and the Socialist Party each receive over 4% of the vote, while all independent candidates have less than 1%. Now let's take a look at some of the other stories from around the world.
One person has been killed and 6 others wounded in clashes with security services in Basra, Iraq, during protests. The protester Yasser Maki died in hospital. His body was carried near the site where he was wounded while mourners chanted Yasser's blood will not be lost. Protests have been ongoing against the government for poor services and high unemployment.
We were attending the funeral procession of the martyr who died. The security forces opened fire on us and they used tear gas to disperse protesters. They provoked protesters who were angry over the death of their brother. Protesters then tried to storm into the building of the provincial government and they were confronted with bullets and tear gas.
Rival protests have taken place outside the Labour Party's headquarters in London as its National Executive Committee meets to discuss allegations of anti-Semitism. They will decide whether the party should adopt the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance's definition of it. Jeremy Corbyn, the party's leader, was seen arriving amid a demonstration that rejects the IHRA position. Supporters of Corbyn were seen carrying placards reading "Anti-Zionism is not anti-Semitism." The United Nations has urged warring parties in Tripoli, Libya to spare civilians as fighting intensifies. Speaking at a news briefing in Geneva, spokeswoman Elizabeth Throssell warned of the humanitarian catastrophe. Throssell said thousands of civilians are without food and medical treatment. The UN is calling for a safe passage to allow agencies to aid those affected. The clashes between rival factions is the latest violent episode since the fall of Muammar Gaddafi in 2011.
And we've come to the end of this news brief. For these and many other stories, you can find them on our website at telesutv.net/English. And join us on social media. We are on Facebook, we are on Twitter, and we are on Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Sony Gray. Thank you for watching.
Enjoy our programming from Monday to Friday, where you'll find the best